So, Adam, this was a whirlwind. I mean, the Tar Heels, they find out they're the last team in the tournament. We had the podcast that came out that late that night on Sunday, early Monday, about the Heels last team in, going to the first four, and they go and play one of their best games of the year, quite honestly, against a good San Diego State team, but a game that the Tar Heels just dominated in every way. Carolina was good offensively, defensively, in transition, rebounding, all of it. And we can talk about the specifics if we need to. But then they go, after winning that game, a late night flight to Milwaukee. I got into my hotel room, Adam, at maybe around 4 o'clock Central Time that night. So a late flight. Then, and I'm not saying that in any way other than it was a late flight. Then had a couple days to regroup and gather, and then played Ole Miss. And the Tar Heels promptly responded with one of their worst halves of the season, certainly their worst half of basketball since the Clemson game, which, as if you've been with us all year, was a very clear demarcation of the season, where Carolina was down 18 at halftime and just didn't look good, didn't do much right. Some of that was because Ole Miss shot the ball extraordinarily well to start the game. They made 6 of their first 7 threes. I think that knocked Carolina back a bit, but then in the last 6 or 8 minutes of the first half, when Ole Miss came back down to earth, Carolina didn't take advantage and instead kind of limped into the locker room down 18, where I do think they had an opportunity to get it to a more manageable deficit. But then the Tar Heels did something that we have seen them do multiple times this year, and that is, after having a really poor half, come out and look great and look like it was like they were clearly the better team, and got this game to a 2-point game with a minute to play after being down by as many as 22 points. They get it down to a 2-point deficit and ultimately lose by 7 because Ole Miss hit a 3 to go up 5 and then hit a couple free throws down the stretch. And that's it. That's the end of the season. And so, Adam, I think these two games sum up some of the frustration about this year for Carolina. One, you saw what this team could be. Now, were they going to play like that San Diego State game for 40 minutes every single game? No, that would not be possible. But it is possible to play closer to that level more consistently, which Carolina just never really did this year. And then it was just fitting that, and you don't like it, but it was just fitting that the season ended with a game like that Ole Miss game. Because I think those type of games are going to be the games that you remember about this team. Now, did this team get a lot better as the year went on? Absolutely. Did it play much better down the stretch? Yes, it did. Was it playing its best basketball in the last 4-6 weeks of the season? Yes, it was. But I think when you think back on this year, you're going to think about that exact game. Because that exact game was also played against Dayton and against Michigan State and against UCLA and against Florida and against Duke in the ACC tournament. And in this game, where the dramatic shifts in the quality of play, the dramatic deficit that you faced and came all the way back, because in every one of those games, Carolina came all the way back. Every one that I just mentioned, they came all the way back to be within. The only one they didn't lead was the ACC, or were the last two, the ACC tournament against Duke and Ole Miss. And in both of those instances, they got it back to a one-possession game. In the Duke instance, they got it to a one-possession game with the ball. So they came all the way back. Ultimately, in most of them, to fall short. And Adam, I think, frustratingly, that's the story of the season on the court for the Tar Heels, is that exact game that they played against Ole Miss.
It's honestly a little surprising how capable they were of being the exact same team from the second game of the year at Kansas.
Kansas was another game that I failed to mention in that list of games that played out this way.
All the way to the last game. Second game to last game. If you just only saw those two games, you would have a pretty good handle on these Tar Heels. The personnel would look a little different, but the overall product would be pretty close to the same. And just as far as Ole Miss goes, I do think you're right. I thought the key stretch was at the end of the first half when Ole Miss was going 0 for 7 or something like that from the field, and Carolina made up 0 points on the deficit. You knew this run was coming. Everyone watching it knew it was coming. Chris Beard said he knew it was coming. You knew the run was coming. If you're making that run from down 10 or 12, it's much different than if you're making that run from down 18. And that ultimately was why Carolina wasn't able to complete it. The hill was just too steep. And that leaves you with a whole spring and summer to think about, how did you get in that hole in an NCAA tournament game against and as we are recording this, Ole Miss is still playing. They're not a team the caliber of Duke or Auburn or maybe even full-strength Alabama, but you were in a very similar hole against that type of team, and that it was just too much to overcome. But, I mean, since December, haven't we known this is how it was going to end? Right. That somewhere along the line, it was going to end this way, and it did.
Yeah, it's kind of old news at this point with everything that's happened since the end of the season, but the physicality of Ole Miss in the first half was the dominant factor. It just looked like they were there to be the aggressor. Physically, they were clearly bigger, and it just seemed to knock Carolina off its pins for a while. And so, it goes back to that physicality didn't matter in the second half for the Tar Heels. So all season long, Carolina was, and I'm smaller than its opponents. We've talked about it all year long. You knew it was going to be an issue this year for the Heels, and at times it was. But I think this game proved it didn't have to be necessarily. But it was in that first half. And it was, and that's not a statement about the officials. I mean, there were fouls called. There were some that weren't. That played no role in my mind in this game. It was just what it was. It was a physical, hard-fought game, and it looked like that physicality hurt Carolina in the first half.
And our seats move around from game to game, but for this game, we were directly next to the court. And I don't have a specific stat to quantify this, although Ole Miss did out-rebound Carolina, which you would maybe not have expected to happen. But just from sitting where we were in that first half, Ole Miss was there to make things very difficult for the Tar Heels. And the Tar Heels did not like it at all. Every cut through the lane was met with a bump. Every box out was a physical box out that would end up moving the Tar Heel player out of the lane. And again, this, just like Jones said, I'm not talking about the rebounding. I'm talking about the way Ole Miss was playing the game. Carolina was not prepared to play the game that way. And I think Hubert Davis said that after the game, that in every way that they competed, they did so better than the Tar Heels in the first 20 minutes. And it is one of the most stark examples I can ever remember of just sitting there and watching the game happen and thinking Carolina's backing down from this. Like the way Ole Miss is playing is not a way that Carolina is willing to play at this point in time. Then magically, they went in the locker room and reemerged and were willing to play that way, which I really wasn't expecting. Like, it was so stark that I thought, okay, this is what's going to happen in this game. Like, this is how Ole Miss is playing. This is how Carolina is playing. There's no salvaging this. But then somehow it did. And it's mystifying. But in those first 20 minutes, I can think of very few examples of a basketball game between two quote-unquote equals in which one side just physically did what it wanted in almost every way, and the other side was not able to respond at all and didn't particularly – like, it looked like it knocked the Tar Heels back, and they didn't really want to. But then they did in the second half and darn near came back. That was this year's team.
Yeah, I think that will be forever one of the confounding parts about this season is how a game like that could occur more than once. And I think this was probably an extreme example of it, at least of what Adam's talking about. But just the dramatic difference in everything that the Tar Heels were doing. And why did it take till halftime so many times for things to change? I think will be a relevant question.
And weirdly, that like Hubert Davis saw it early because he called that early timeout,
which he doesn't do very often.
And that obviously didn't fix it. But the fact that it was so noticeable that quickly, so noticeable that you call the timeout you never call. Like something was amiss, and everyone saw it.
So, I mean, from the straight basketball perspective, we have a lot of other stuff to talk about from the basketball itself. Hubert Davis said it on the radio show this week, the final one of the year on Wednesday night this week. You know, the need to get bigger. I do think, Carolyn, that's a very obvious need for the Tar Heels. I do think that hampered them at times this season. Again, but the weird part, Adam, and I said this just a minute ago, it doesn't feel like it didn't all the time, and it seemed like there were times where they were determined that it didn't have to hamper them. It was just, what an unpredictable year this has been.
Well, and it's not like you can say bigger and then say, and by bigger, I mean this. Like, Van Allen Lubin is not very big. But there were many times this year where I thought he was playing the biggest of anyone on the court. So you can't just say, well, bigger means taller, or bigger means more muscular, or something like that. Like playing bigger. But in some cases, bigger does mean taller.
Yeah.
Like in the backcourt.
Yeah.
Where I think Carolina was not big enough. So bigger is like this word that means multiple things. Like, there were players much quote unquote bigger than Van Allen Lubin who got pushed around more against Ole Miss.
Two quick things, and then we'll go to the kind of off-season transition here. One, it is good to see Jalen Withers not expected to be injured long-term. That looked really bad when it happened. He was very clearly in pain. And I think, at least from where we were sitting, there was some concern that this may be a long-term issue. Now, obviously, his college playing career is done, but if he wants to continue to play or whatever he continues to do, it was good to see that has been just deemed a really severe ankle sprain, and nothing more than that. So that's good news. And also, Adam, it closed the book on R.J. Davis at Carolina. He leaves as the Tar Heels' second all-time leading scorer, third in ACC history in that category. He's made more threes than anybody in Carolina history, fourth in ACC in that category. He's Carolina's best free throw shooter percentage-wise all time. He's played more games than anybody in ACC history. Finished right outside the top 10 in assists for the Tar Heels. And we've talked about this, just a little bit of a sentimental closing of the book as well for multiple reasons. One, he is the last player that had any tie to Roy Williams. Of course, was originally committed when Coach Williams was the head coach. I'm not sure with the current rules of college basketball and college athletics that you're going to see a player stay at one place for that long at that level of play. So that accomplished at one place for that long. And Adam, it just kind of, we may have said this at the end of last year when we weren't sure who was coming back. I don't remember, but I think this was the definitive. It just kind of feels like the definitive close on the previous era of college basketball from the Tar Heel kind of isolated point of view, with him graduating and moving on.
He was the guy who, when you were thinking about next year's team, you started with, okay, there'll be RJ. Now there's no RJ. And so now Carolina is fully in this era of you build your team year by year until different rules are in place. I just don't see another scenario where we see another RJ Davis. I think the sentimental part made stronger by the fact that he never missed a game.
Never missed a game in 5 years. Played every single game.
So reliable. You could count on him to be there. He would have off-shooting games, but he would be there. You've heard him here on the pod multiple times, and you know him to be really good guy, really smart guy who appreciates Carolina basketball for all the things that I think most of us appreciate it for, and that we're all kind of together concerned that we're not sure what college basketball is going to be moving forward. He seemed like he liked it for the reasons we liked it. And I don't know how easy it's going to be to find someone like that. And I do think the tie to Roy Williams is not insignificant.
So, Tar Heels season comes to a close at a very mundane 23-14 on the year.